Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 5, Ancient Greece, Section 2, the Classical Age. And as we go along, there's some additional kind of items that I'm going to bring up. I think what I need you to do right now is to make sure that you write down the items that are already in your packet. So here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about forms of government. And in Athens, and really throughout part of the ancient world, we see this evolution of forms of government. Matter of fact, our American government is really kind of based on some of this. So when we talk about maybe some of the basic forms, we've got to talk about the tyrants. Or sometimes today we use terms like dictatorships. It's a form of government where an individual who is very strong can seize power and eventually rule until someone else takes their power away. We have monarchies, which is a form of government that's been around for a long, long time, has a lot to do with heredity. So people are born into certain families or dynasties, and hence they are given that opportunity to lead based on that. You can have an oligarchy. What you see here is an image of something that is known as the triumvirate, which we're going to talk about when we get into talking about Rome. But it's a form of government where you have maybe three people or more that share power. In today's world, you might find this in present day China. And then finally, you have democracy, power to the people, where the people, for the most part, determine how the government is operated. So, in the classical age, Athenian democracy is what we consider to be a direct democracy in which only certain people allowed to vote who were basically labeled as citizens. And those people were expected to vote in all the elections, serve in office if they were elected, serve on juries, and in the military during times of war. And to resolve conflicts, we're going to have a series of different leaders that are going to come to power. We have a fellow named Draco. And during the time that Draco came to power, there was a gap between the rich and the poor. And his solution to resolve this was to instill some really harsh laws and punishments. And as a result of that, there was some stability, but for the most part, it didn't always resolve the problems between the gap between the rich and the poor. We have a leader named Solon who was faced with these harsh laws and punishments that were left over from Draco's time. And what he did is he actually set up juries, he did some tax revisions. Members of any class were allowed to be on the council. In a way, out of all these leaders that you see right in front of you here, he's probably one of the best. Pisistratus, when he came to power, there were a lot of issues about some of the aristocracy or the aristocrats that were in office. These are the people who were kind of the upper class, if you want to call them that. And to resolve that, he pushed the aristocrats out. He encouraged trade. Matter of fact, Athens during his time in office became very, very wealthy. And as a result of that, that kind of gives money to the government, and hence the nation flourished. Though he was kind of a dictator. I mean, he was kind of a harsh fella. Some people see that economic gain as being a benefit. And Callisthenes, his concern was power of noble families. And as a result of this, he established tribes based on where people lived, kind of a geographic idea. So if you lived in a certain neighborhood in Athens, then you would belong to that tribe. And the tribes would then elect council representatives, and they would also get to elect somebody from their neighborhood that would serve as a general in the Athenian army. In a way, this has a lot to do with the way we set up government at the local level and city government. So, to resolve the conflicts between the rich and the poor, Draco reformed laws in Athens, but he was incredibly harsh, as you recall. Pisistratus, even though he was a tyrant, he did improve government and trade. We know that Athens became very wealthy. Of Athens' early reformers, Solon was a very effective leader because he concerned himself with fairness in government and not necessarily punishment. And in Athens, only people allowed to vote were free males over the age of 20 and those who had completed military training. So, kind of to recap, Athens had a direct democracy. Only certain people were allowed to vote. That would include free males, so no women, people over the age of 20, you had to complete military service. And if you qualified for that, then you would have to do the following. You'd have to vote in all elections, serve in office if elected, serve on juries when it was your time, and then serve in the military during times of war. When we look at Athens' government, the Athenian democracy, it actually had three parts, not necessarily to resemble maybe what we have as our three branches of government in the United States, but they had a full assembly, which would basically be all eligible male citizens. And they did primarily the lawmaking and the decision making. They did a lot of voting, is what they kind of did. As far as those people who really did the writing of the law, that would include a group known as the Council of 500. Their main job was to write these laws, and eventually those laws would be given to the full assembly for the opportunity to vote upon. And then finally, there were the courts. They heard trials, they sentenced criminals. In Athens, there were many different layers of the court system. Okay, but there were some other people that would be elected, and you had generals. As I mentioned before, they would be elected from tribes that would be kind of neighborhood areas. The archon, which is a individual, one person, who would serve as the chief of state in Athens, not necessarily a president, but an individual who would serve a one-year term and could be reelected as many times as you wanted to. So there was, in this day and age, we would call them term limits. There were no term limits. But if they failed to do their job, they could be removed from office, and worse yet, they could be punished because they didn't serve the people well. So one of the things that we're going to get into talking about is a series of wars that took place in this region of the world, kind of known as the Persian Wars. Kind of leading up, there's an area of what is present-day Turkey known as Iona, which isn't really all that far from mainland Greece, but during the time that we're discussing, Iona, for the most part, was actually a part of Greece. It was a colony. Okay. And as a result of some wars and the rise of the Persian Empire, Iona at some point in time will fall to the Persians. There would be a rebellion there by some of these citizens wanting to go back to Greek governance. And as a result of that, the ruler named Darius was very upset and he wanted revenge. And hence, we have the beginnings of our first Persian Wars. You may have heard of some of these battles, like the Battle of Marathon, which is not very far from Athens. Okay, this is Marathon here. This is Athens. And supposedly, the story goes, there was a runner who saw that the Persians were coming, ran from Marathon to Athens as fast as he could. It's roughly 26 miles. And as he gets to Athens, he dies. But he is kind of remembered as the first guy to do this marathon race. As a result of this, the people of Athens sent one of their phalanx, which is a group of men who are armed and carry shields, and they were able to catch the Persians by surprise, and they were able to win that victory. And as a result of that, they were able to push back the Persians for roughly 10 years. And then eventually the Persians will return. Darius is going to pass away, and his son, Xerxes, is going to assume power, and he is seeking revenge for his father. And so there is going to be a series of battles. Thermopylae, which is this area right here, there's a story that our Spartans were hiding there in a mountain pass as the Persians came in, and they were able to hold them off for a period of time. And then eventually a local person gives away the position of the Spartan soldiers, and eventually the Persians are going to be able to beat them. But as a result of that, there's going to be, kind of a rise to power, and you're going to have a battle at the Strait of Salamis. And it's a time when Athens' new navy is able to go against the Persians in that area of the Strait of Salamis. And Xerxes is said to have brought his throne out to watch this naval battle, and as a result of that, he got to watch his Persian fleet get destroyed. Um, Another battle that's going to take place is at Plataea, which is probably one of the last of the major battles at Plataea, where Spartans with their army and men throughout the area of Greece come together, and it's the last final crush of the Persian soldiers, and that happens around 479. So the Persian Wars, they started in the early 400 BCs. Second Persian invasion unified Greece because Iona and Sparta worked with Athens and other city-states for their mutual defense. As a result of the Battle of Salamis, the Persian navy is destroyed and its army eventually is going to be crushed at Plataea, and that's going to be the end of the Persian Wars. So after these wars, we have kind of a grouping of alliances that's going to form. And some of this is throughout part of the different city-states that's going to arise. Some of the peoples of Athens are going to form a city or form a league of other city-states, and they're going to have their supposedly their wealth placed at a place called Delos, and thus this league becomes known as the Delian League. One that there are going to be some questions about how this league spends money and the influence of Athens, and eventually that's going to lead Sparta to form its own league, the Peloponnesian League, that's named after the peninsula that they're located on. And as a result of that, we're going to have more war. So in number 9, Athens became more influential than Sparta because Spartans were not popular with the rest of Greece. If you remember how strict they are, that probably has a little bit to do with that. Athens was the largest and the richest member of the Delian League, and in its time, it controlled both the ships and the money of that area. And hence, they take some of this money, the people of Athens, to build this building known as the Parthenon. And this Parthenon really dipped into a lot of the wealth that was tied in with the other city-states of the Delian League. And hence, we're going to have the outbreak of the Peloponnesian Wars. So Macedonia was able to win victory over Greece because it continued fighting basically because of the fighting between Sparta and Athens and the loss of wealth and resources and power. Sparta's defeat by Thebes probably had a little bit to do with that. Macedonia is a region to the north of what would have been some of these city-states of Greece, and eventually they are going to dominate this area. Alexander the Great was also a Macedonian. So the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War was due to a rivalry between Athens and Sparta, and the Peloponnesian League, which was the Spartan League, declared war on the Delian League, which is the Athens League, because it feared Athens' fleet would stop it and its allies from trade. So some of the similarities and differences of Athens and Sparta. Athens, for the most part, had a limited democracy, laws by an assembly, male-only citizens, trade with other city-states. There was education for boys, but women, not so much. Sparta, they had a monarchy with 2 kings. You had a military society. Trade and travel was not allowed. The military training was mandatory for boys. Girls were trained to be mothers of soldiers, and women obeyed the men, and women owned the property. In some similarities, they have a common language. They share the same heroes. They competed in the Olympics, same gods, same religious beliefs. Thank you very much.